Hey friends, welcome to this week's episode of Not Your Mama's Podcast. And today I'm so excited. We have Lainie Liberty on. She is a best-selling author, an international speaker, and a teen mentor, world schooler. She is phenomenal, and we're so excited to have her on today. So Lainie, can you give the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Okay, yeah. So most of the time when I share my origin story, I start in 2008, although there's parts of it that go farther back, but let's just start there for brevity's sake. I'm originally from California, and in 2008, we experienced an economy crash. And at the time, I was not a stay-at-home, but a self-employed business owner. I worked in branding, marketing, graphic design, advertising for almost 20 years. And the last 8 of those years, I owned my own agency. So I had an agency that specialized in doing branding and campaign development for green eco companies and nonprofits. And by the end of 2008, I started to see my clients going away because the nonprofits were first to be hit. And so by the end of the year, I knew I wasn't bringing my staff back for 2009. And I was clearly overworked and pretty stressed.
Yeah.
And as a single parent, one of the things that I heard from my son over and over was, "Mom, you never spend any time with me. You're always working." And that was like a dagger into the heart. And I knew that something had to change. And I just saw this as an opportunity. And without too much sort of cognitive thinking about it, I was inspired to look over at my son one night in the office. It was like 9 o'clock. He, like I said, was 9 years old. And I looked over at him. His name is Miro. And I said, "Miro, what do you think if we just got rid of all this stuff and just went out and had an adventure?" And he stopped playing his game. He looked over at me and he's like, "One question." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Do I have to go to school?" I was like, "No, you don't." And he said, "I am in." And that basically started the journey that we embarked on, which was life-changing. We left the States for what was to be a 1-year adventure. That was, like I said, in the beginning of 2009. It's 2023 now. We still have not made it home. We've been back to visit. I'll tell you that, but we've been out of the country we're just starting on our 15th year. So we've been around the world several times. My son has since grown up. He's now 24. We've lived in nomadic life. We've lived in partnership. A good part of our journey has been focused on Worldschooling, which is a combination of experiential and social learning, and in partnership. And the other half has been really about nurturing and taking care of our mental health and really focusing on the connection, the partnership between myself and my son. So that's sort of the origin story. And I could talk about, all the things that happened during that time. But yeah, that's enough to get us started.
Well, that's awesome. How fun. What an adventure. So where are you guys living right now?
So I'm talking to you, oddly enough, the first place we set out when we left on our journey was Mexico. And for the last 3 years, Mexico has been my home. So I just happened to be here when the pandemic hit, and we just never left. My son actually did leave. He was 22 or 21 at the time. And when the pandemic hit and all of our trips, so I guess I'll sort of premise, together, my son and I started several companies. The first one was 10 years ago, and it's called Project Worldschooling. And so we've been bringing teens around the world for these immersive learning experiences, living in community for about a month, 3 to 4 weeks.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and it's really a wonderful way to explore the outer worlds by nurturing the inner worlds as well. So it's social learning, experiential learning without curriculum, but it's something that my son and we've created the formula on how to design an experience based on the country that we're in. So we've done month-long trips in Peru and in South Africa and in Greece. Greece, the theme was, walking the path of the gods, and it was all a mythology living, in modern myth. And it was just a really wonderful trip. We've done trips. We did a trip in Wales, and that was a building trip because we wanted to experience what it's like living on an organic farm. And we built this big roundhouse, like a cob roundhouse. We've done trips in Thailand, which are about service, the culture, serving elephants, and adventure, stepping outside of our comfort zone. So it was the first trip where we introduced rock climbing as part of our experience, and it was just a beautiful place to do it. So all around the world, each place has different things to offer, and the experience was designed based on the gifts and culture of our host country. So that's one of the things we did. Yeah. Just an incredible experience. And I've totally lost track of what the original was.
But so how can like someone who wants to have their teen experience, other cultures and be a part of this program, how do they get involved? How can they sign up and participate? And I know also you do a lot of teen mentorship with like mental health. So first, how can someone sign up their teen to participate in these fun worldly adventures?
So that's a really easy answer. Project World School is a website, and you can find us online or on Instagram, and just reach out. Our next trip is in Thailand in November. So that's a month-long trip. But we've had to relaunch slower. We were producing 4 to 5 teen, like learning communities a year. And in 2020, we had none. They kept getting canceled, right? 2021, we didn't do any trips for Project World School. And then 2022, last year, we did our first trip, which was a short one here in Mexico. And then this year, also, we did a short trip, an intro trip in Mexico. And then we're expanding. We're going back to Thailand. So we're starting to ramp up again. But it's easy to find our information just by going to projectworldschool.com. Now, since 2020, I said that I've been working with teens for the past 10 years, taking them on trips around the world. Well, I guess part of my origin story is going back to my childhood. And I was raised in a household where there was a lot of trauma. I was always being yelled at. There was a lot of mental health stuff that I had to overcome due to my childhood. And a good part of my late teens and early 20s, and even into my 30s, I worked tremendously on self-healing and studying psychology and spirituality and philosophy and every single modality I could get my hands on. Because part of my trauma response from my childhood was hyper independence. And so, I could do it. Whatever it is, I could do it. I could do it myself. I don't need anybody. I can learn it. I've got a brain. It works, quite well. I'm capable of learning anything. And I believe that. And that kept me, my intrinsic motivation really activated. So in some sense, the trauma response served me. In other respects, I had to really get over not allowing people in and not allowing help and pushing people away and things like that. But the process of my 20s and 30s, I knew I always wanted to be a parent, and I never wanted to parent in the manner which I was parented.
Mhm.
And so, through self-inquiry and recognizing that I had these patterns and triggers and fears that were not healthy, and I wanted to break these generational wounds, I worked really, really hard on focusing on how to self-heal and what tools I could use, and really mastering the internal space. Doesn't mean that through the work that I've done, I've gotten rid of my traumas. I've learned to integrate them as an active part of who I am. This is my experience and the way that my brain has been written.
Mhm.
So the tools that I used for myself, and the research and the knowledge, all that gave me tools to use when we brought teens out into the world, because noticing that they're outside of their comfort zone, there's fear, sometimes there's lashing out, sometimes there's shutting down. I had to know how to hold space and support the teens that were traveling with us. So the experience of the tools I used for myself came in handy. It was a great something to have in my tool belt. And so when 2020 rolled around and we weren't traveling, I decided to take all those tools and formulate them into an online course for teens who were struggling tremendously during the pandemic. Mental health hit this population greater than any other population. The
Mhm.
adolescents suffered. And so I stepped up and I was there to serve my community. And in fact, I even wrote a book for parents so they could support their teens, because I could only, I'm only one person, I could only
Yeah.
reach many. And so I wanted to make sure that parents felt empowered and had the same tools that I had to help facilitate some of these challenges in their home. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I still even feel after the pandemic, the teens have such a hard time growing up. It wasn't like how I grew up. We have the social media, that is something that was really impactful to their mental health. And I mean, I just couldn't imagine growing up, because people bully online and do all those things. It's just, I think it's tough for kids growing up these days. And it's a whole new field. And we're going to see what happens when they turn into adults with all the technology and the access that they have to everything.
Yeah, it absolutely is a different world. And I find that many parents don't recognize that, and they parent for the way that they were parented, or
Mhm.
the world that they knew. And it's very difficult. However, media literacy absolutely needs to be a part of every, child's education. But in addition to that growing need, we need to have the tools to understand our internal worlds, because you're right, it's outright nasty, sometimes online bullying, even in-person bullying. But the
Mhm.
online bullying has this whole different dynamic that you and I, especially me, you're way younger than me, but especially me, like in my childhood, I didn't deal with this,
Yeah.
because you were bullied, you knew who was bullying you. And the anonymous nature of nastiness and hiding behind, your computer screen as with an alias, it allows people to really be nasty, or really be cruel. And how, as developing individuals, especially if we're in our adolescence, if we don't have the tools to know what's true for us by checking in, yeah, things can hurt. And yes, if we have tools to deal with and feel the feelings that come up and process them and let them go, then that's the healthiest thing to do. But if we don't know how to do that, we either swallow our emotions and push them down, we explode and, fight. There's so many different ways of reacting. If we don't know what's going on, we then just become the reaction,
Mhm.
which is your natural programmed reaction to things. And I really feel like tools need to be a part of everybody's education for understanding their internal worlds.
Totally. And then you really talk a lot about partnership parenting.
Yeah.
Kind of like that conscious parenting. Can you give a little deep dive into that too, please?
Sure. Now, I've read so much. Again, my hyper independence is, I can read anything, I can learn anything. And in fact, I don't have a PhD, but the book that I wrote that I'll talk about a little bit has been endorsed by PhDs and psychologists and mental health professionals all around the world because it's very well researched. So the idea that we can learn whatever we want to learn is one of those powerful affirmations for us. Repeat the question one more time. Sorry, my mom.
No, it's fine. Just about like conscious parenting,
Oh, yeah. Yes.
and how we have partnership in parenting.
That's right. So the reason why I was telling you I've read so many things is I've read not every single, but most modalities in parenting. I've read conscious parenting, about books about conscious parenting. I've read books about attachment parenting, peaceful parenting, gentle parenting, aware parenting, hand-in-hand parenting. And I've basically taken the best of all of those. There's wonderful things about each of those modalities or philosophies, and I love many parts of it. But there are many parts of each of those things that I don't like. And the majority, I can sum up what I don't like. There tends to be this belief that as parents, we are entitled to live in a home that serves our greater needs. And so, okay, on the surface, that sounds lovely. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a home that serves our greater needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times that comes at the expense of our children. And many of these modalities teach us how to change the behavior in somebody else. And that to me is where the problem starts, because that is parenting with an agenda. And it doesn't matter if you're doing gently or consciously or peacefully, you are still imposing your agenda on another human being. And so I really wanted to live in partnership. There was a book that I read early on in my parenting journey that influenced me to no end. And it's called, of course, I'm going to forget it. It's called The Continuum Concept. And it's written by a woman, Judith Lightoff, I think is her name. She's not alive anymore, but she spent years living in community with different indigenous communities in Peru, in the Amazon region. And from a sociology perspective, she studied the manner in which people reared children. And one of the foundational beliefs in indigenous communities is our children are born whole. They're not empty vessels like we believe in the Western world to dump our information, our goals, our values,
our influence
into our children. They're not that. They're not empty vessels. They are whole vessels that need to learn how to actualize their voice and really discover who they are. And exactly. And as parents, we're honored with the gift of being able to guide or facilitate the childhood of these youngsters. And so allowing them to make mistakes and trusting them to use, fire and knives and tools, and being held by the support of a community without judgment. And the word no is not used in these communities. And it's a powerful way to look at child rearing. And so when I started to adapt that, because it really resonated with me, here's this whole person. If I'm going to use gentle parenting or conscious parenting, a lot of that stuff, which I love, is about learning to recognize our own behaviors and reactions as parents. but it's also ways to make sure that they respond in kind in a way that serves us. So for my convenience, in gentle parenting, instead of yelling and I want my child to do something, we'll negotiate, we'll create different ways of talking. And I still think that's a manipulation. I think there's no sugarcoating life. So I've taken the kindness factor, the values, the consciousness, the awareness of oneself, and I've combined that with partnership in sort of an anarchist perspective. Anarchist in the way that we're not allowing somebody else to be the authoritarian in the relationship. We're partners.
Yeah.
So he's whole person, I'm whole person. We have different roles in the relationship. My age, I'm the breadwinner. I'm capable of doing those things. He's capable of doing other things. And we agree to the things that we both contribute equally to the relationship. It doesn't mean we're equal or the same. It means we're both contributing because we're both responsible for this precious thing that we call our relationship. And to do that in partnership means I'm not the boss. That means he's not the boss. It means together we are making our decisions and defining how we're going to live our lives. We also don't live with rules or external rules at all. Rules of the world around us or social rules, they're not important to us. We live by our values. And it's much easier to say, okay, here's this big decision we need to make together. What do you think? What do I think? If we're both on the fence, let's run this through the filter of our core values and see what's in alignment, what comes up. And that empowerment that comes from within and the act of empowering one another and expecting that to be our norm, that's our base. That creates partnership. So when I say anarchist parenting, it's not like chaos and fighting. That that's the way people use the word, but it's an incorrect way. It means we are voluntarily giving consent to the things that we wish to give consent to. And that is a big part of the foundation of how we live our lives. Yeah.
No, I love that. It's beautiful because also it gives, the child a sense of belonging. Also, they feel in control of kind of like the decisions and their, and they also have like, they feel heard. I actually really do resonate with like that partnership stuff. I try that with, even though I have like only a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, even with my 4-year-old, I try to give him like decisions to kind of make him feel like, he's one with me and the family and things like that. So I try to be like, well, what would you like to do? And how would we like to do it? You know what I mean? Like, so he feels he has a voice and he's heard. And I think that's really beautiful. I like your philosophy on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's different. It's outside of the norm. But I will tell you that if you go all in with this style of parenting, you never get rebellion, because what is there to rebel against? It only works if you're both or everyone in the family is committed to really being accountable for their internal worlds. And if you as the parent or parents are modeling that this is the manner in which our family culture is expressed, you don't have to teach it. You just do it by showing it, by living it. You're modeling that I'm being accountable. Oh, I messed up. I was triggered, and let me tell you what happened in my own sort of internal world. This reminded me of this. I have a pattern of this. It wasn't you, and I'm sorry because it was inappropriate the way that I responded. And that kind of, I'm accountable. I never forced my son to do that. I never said, you need to do what I'm doing. But because that's how I treated him, he stepped up was self-aware, oh, I'm sorry. I realize, I was being mean, that I really should have considered X, Y, or Z. And that was on me. I'm sorry. And that's repair. That's accountability. That's awareness. And, now to be like a parent of an adult son, I see what a brilliant man he's become, because he's so self-aware and he's so compassionate, because it was such an active part of our family culture.
Yeah, they say things aren't taught, they're caught. So be careful what you do, because they're going to catch up on it. And it's true. I do the same thing now. Sometimes, I get triggered, and sometimes I get a little angry, and then, a little bit later I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. I may have overreacted. Let's hug it out. Like, I didn't mean to get so mad. It just, X, Y, and Z kind of set me off. Like, I try to talk in like 4-year-old language. But I apologize sometimes, because after a while I'm like, God, I think I was just like maybe a little too harsh on that. And so I go and I'm like, I'm sorry, Mom was just getting frustrated, and I shouldn't have been so mad. And, I try to do those things too, to recognize my feelings so that he can be more aware of his feelings and understand that, it's okay to apologize. It's okay to have anger. It's okay to do all these things, but, how do we work through it all?
Yeah, it's really fascinating too, because I never knew what kind of an effect this kind of parenting would have on my son. And when I wrote my book, I asked him if he'd read it and then write the foreword. And he said, of course, of course. And he wrote something to the extent of how all of his friends think of their parents on this pedestal as somebody to be worshiped. And my mom was not that. My mom was fallible. She was confident enough to show me her her challenges, her dark side, or the things that we try and hide. And he really got to understand what it means to be human. And I reflect on my own childhood. I was afraid of my parents, and I still am in some my God. But like living, your entire childhood in fear. Oh my God, I don't have that same opinion about my parents that my son has about me. And thankfully, I think, that means that I moved into a space where I am breaking these generational wounds. So showing our fallibility and showing who we are, the good, the bad, the ugly, the challenges. I mean, obviously, my son is not my therapist, but I don't, I don't hide anything from him in the sense where, this is what Mom's going through right now. I'm struggling because here's this pattern, and it really makes me feel bad. And I really need to do some work around that. And that honesty and awareness and vulnerability created such a strong connection of trust between us, which
and
I think is really
understanding.
powerful.
Understanding as well, because he's not just like making up all these conspiracy theories in his head about his mom and like, why is she acting this way? It's like being forward and honest, like, hey, I'm kind of going through stuff right now, so I'm probably not going to be on my A game. So, and he understands that. So I think that's good to have that open, honest communication so that they're not in the dark and they can understand what's going on. Because like you said in the beginning, we are all human. We all go through our things, and we all have our issues. We all have our past. And, we always need to go in and hug our inner child, because we all have childhood traumas growing up. So, I know that I remember there was one point where I realized, oh, my parents have issues. They're not these people on the pedestal. They're humans, and they have flaws too. But I didn't realize that until, when you kind of get in your teens, you start noticing that. And it's just good awareness. But Lainie, I have 4 questions I love to ask all my guests, and I can't wait to know what your answers are. And my first one is, who and what inspires you?
And you know what? To be fair, you gave me an intro. You said you were going to ask me these questions, and I said I didn't know how I was going to answer. I still don't. Who and what inspires me? Well, besides my son inspiring me daily, which I think is a wonderful thing. I think one of the researchers that I really resonated with, and I learned a lot about mindfulness and introspection and attachment and healing attachment wounds, is Dr. Daniel Siegel. He wrote a really powerful book that I consider is my Bible. It's called Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain. But he also wrote books like Mindsight and The Attached Parent and things like that. So all of his work is really, really compelling. And I think he's one of my heroes because I've learned so much through his research and his life's work.
Great answer. And my second question is, what is something you wished you knew when you were younger?
I wish I knew when I was younger that it was okay to be myself, that I was not invisible, that I did matter. I spent a good portion of my childhood not liking who I was because I was always being yelled at. And I felt like it wasn't okay to be me. I really did. And, that really propelled me into some very negative coping mechanisms, self-sabotage, and drugs, and, things that teens do. And I understand, actually, that gave me a great source of understanding and foundation when I connect and work with teens. And so, I've learned to take these experiences and make them something that's really positive in my life. But I really wish that I knew that it was okay to be me.
No, that's a good reminder, because sometimes we're just not comfortable in our skin, and got to realize, you're perfect the way you are. And yeah, no, I relate to that too. That's something I wished I knew when I was younger as well. And then my third question is, what's the essential part of your daily routine?
Yeah. Well, it depends where I am in my process. I go through lots of different cycles of journaling or reading. I did create a wonderful tool that I use. It's a 30-day tool to reprogram some of my wiring. And when you find that those things come up, one of the things that I can, like one of my habits would be doing this process before I go to bed. So it just depends really where I am in my process. But because I've been using tools for mental health and for, really like nurturing my curiosity and learning, it just really depends where I am on my journey. Sometimes I'm really passionate about painting and I do a lot of art, and sometimes I go months without doing any art and I'm focusing on something else. But knowing that I've got lots of different things that light me up, and part of that is because I've done the work to know what feeds my soul, and I just have to recognize what's alive for me in that moment, because I don't do all of them all the time. So I thought it was kind of a non-committal answer, but there's a reason for that.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. And then, so my fourth question is, the best advice you've ever received.
I'm going to actually, because I'm an anarchist, flip that on its head. Instead of telling you the best advice I've ever received, I'm going to tell you the best advice that I give to families always.
Perfect.
If you wish to change your situation, your connection, your relationship with other people, whether it's your partner, your children, business partner, friends, it doesn't matter. And if you're experiencing conflict or triggers or something along the lines that doesn't feel, like peace or easiness, get into the habit of learning to pause. So pausing, I write about this in my book, A Family That Pauses Versus Reacts. That's the very first step of learning to change the dynamic. So what you're doing is you're not playing a pattern. You're not running the same story over and over, even when it's might be appropriate or it may not be appropriate. It's just you're playing the reaction. So instead of doing that, you're creating space and time in between. The thing happens, you have some sort of response or trigger or emotion or whatever the thing is, and instead of reacting, you can then pause and then make the choice of how to respond. And that works in every situation, from parenting littles to, boyfriend and girlfriend stuff, to dealing with parents, like as an adult with my adult parents, learning to pause.
No, that is really great. No, I liked how you flipped it. That was a good way to end the episode. Well, if you guys want to reach out to Lainie, all of her links are down below in the show notes. Don't be shy. Go say hi. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of Not Your Mama's Podcast. And I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.